Thanks for having me here. I appreciate American Underground giving me an opportunity to chat with everybody. We're going to talk a little bit today about how your brand needs to look, sound, and feel to be impactful. I know a lot of you folks are probably in the weeds of what you're doing and developing and bringing to market. So a lot of the ways that you talk about your product once it goes to market is very important. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Just go through a little bit of the agenda here. We'll do an overview of myself a little bit, and then overview of what we're going to cover off a little bit, and then talk about the challenge that I came here to talk about, and then summarize it up at the end. So as a me overview, so I've worked in marketing for 15 plus years. I run a brand website and marketing agency called Intersecting Knowledge. I've been doing that for just about 4 years now. And I enjoy golf, music, and most prevalent beer. And I think kind of all three of those things go together. But that's just a little bit about me. My agency really is focused on creating brands and then bringing them to the masses, whether it be digitally or offline. So we're really going to gear in towards that kind of stuff. So as far as the objective of today's chat, we're really trying to discuss the importance of creating a simplified, consistent, and impactful communication system for your organization. As I mentioned earlier, I know you guys as startups or small companies just trying to get going, you're really in the weeds of your product or your service. Sometimes that leads to the ability, it limits the ability for you to then convey that to your target audience because you're using either acronyms or you're using words that you typically are immersed in on a daily basis, but someone outside your organization isn't going to understand that. So what really is important for my company when I talk to a startup is how do we extrapolate key things that are going to basically resonate with the target audiences that you're trying to sell your product and service to. So that's kind of what we're really going to talk about today. This is funny. So when the pandemic actually hit, 8, 9, 10, actually over a year ago now, I guess, we were working from home, my wife and I have a daughter. And I just thought this was kind of funny that this happened because it really conveys in a comical way the importance of sort of messaging and how you say things. So I'm just going to play this video real quick. Hopefully you guys can all hear it.
So this day and age, there's a lot of people working from home. It's even more difficult when you have two people working from home, but we've and a kid running around. But we've devised a system that when the door's shut, there's a sign that says we're busy. So my daughter made one for my wife. Let me show you that. As we walk here, working, do not disturb. It's nice, right? And so then we get to my office, which is over here, and that's mine.
So just, tongue in cheek, but, those two signs are saying the same thing. Essentially, they're getting that same message across is, hey, I'm busy, don't come in, do not disturb. But one is said in a more eloquent, professional way, as opposed to the other one. So it's not really all about what you're saying, it's really how you say it. And that really does impact a lot of your marketing efforts. So I just thought that was prevalent to the kind of this conversation today. So the challenge that you guys are facing, so there is some legwork that needs to happen prior to someone like myself to being able to come in and help you guys with messaging, positioning, and creating a consistent system. And some of that legwork can either be done in co-working with someone like myself, or you guys can do it a lot of yourself. But some of that is basically identifying key stakeholders and decision makers. You really need to identify who you're targeting with your product or service, because that's going to be a key component into how you talk about it. Second part is clearly define the key differentiators of your product or service. So when you're thinking about what you're bringing to market, think about the audience who's going to be using that and what is going to get that person to lean forward at their desk saying, oh my God, you guys can help me with that. So these are certain things that you really need to extrapolate from your service or your product. So you can basically then craft messaging and positioning that's going to assert that into the demographic and the people that you're looking to sell your products to. Once that's sort of navigated, once those challenges are sort of laid out and you've identified your key stakeholders, you've extrapolated those key differentiators of your value added of your product and services, now what do you do? Now you have to execute, right? And so now you go into market, you know who you're talking to, and you know what your key differentiators are that are going to basically solve a lot of problems for these people that you're trying to sell your product or service to. But simply executing is not going to deliver. There's certain things And, when you think about it, and after I talk about it, you might say, wow, that makes sense. But you don't think about it when you're bringing something to market, because as I mentioned, you guys are immersed in it on a daily basis. So you get, your mind kind of gets wrapped around what you're doing, and you don't really realize that an external person might not understand what you're talking about. So what we're going to talk about is it's vital to ensure every piece of your communication vehicles are crafted to do certain things. One is to speak to the right audience. So who are you talking to? Is it a CEO? Is it a CFO? Is it a CIO? Is it a CMO? Is it someone different? I just kind of pulled off these high level people, but each one of these individuals speaks a different language. Each one of these individuals understands certain things that the other doesn't. So when you're thinking about who you're targeting for your product or service, make sure you understand who they are and how they speak. There's certain acronyms that are used in their industry. And I can talk about acronyms in a little bit too. I caution to use acronyms a lot, because you probably use a lot in your daily life thinking about your product or service. But someone like a CEO at a company might not even understand what that acronym is. So again, you need to really identify who your audience is, and then understand sort of how to speak to that audience. That is certainly one of the key points that you need to do when it comes to crafting these communications. The other one is, as I mentioned, highlighting those key elements of your product or service. So everyone in the world is looking to make their life easier, right? And so if you can highlight the key points of your software or your service or whatever you're bringing to market that's going to basically solve somebody's problem sitting at their desk, then they're going to have a hard time not purchasing it, right? If you come to them and say, we can solve this, this, and this, and it resonates with them, they're going to be like, wow, I need that. So it's really important that you highlight those key differences. There's probably a lot of things that your software or your product or your service can actually solve for, but I think it's important to not dilute it with all of them and really pull out the high key elements, the ones that are the high targets, the major pain points. That way you're hitting the target, and then obviously you can talk about the additional added benefits later on. So another part of this is remaining consistent across all mediums. This is vitally important. And I don't know if anybody has kids out there, but that Baby Shark song, I'm sure if you don't have kids, you've heard of the Baby Shark song, right? It just gets drilled in your head. And that's because it's like over and over and over again, it's the same thing. That's kind of what you want your marketing to do. Your marketing needs to be consistent and emphasizing the same points over and over again, so it'll resonate. If your communication and your marketing is all over the place, it may be saying the same thing, kind of like those two signs in my house, but it's saying it differently, your message is being lost. So it's really important that your messaging and your communications are consistent across all vehicles. And then we're talking about your website. So 99% of your company or your targets are going to probably meet you online, whether it was a conversation you had with somebody, whether they did a Google search, whatever it is, they're going to see your company for the first time online. So your website needs to be really, really efficient at getting the story across and not confusing people. Again, not using terms that you guys internally use, using terms that they would use and they understand. So your communication on your website needs to be very succinct and very clear. And again, speaking to the audience that you're targeting, as well as highlighting those key points of how your product or service can solve for the issues that are on that person's desk. Same thing with your emails. So any kind of communication going out, if someone gets an email, they click on a link or they go to the website, and then that email and the website aren't in sync, aren't saying the same thing and saying the same way, you're going to lose that momentum that you've built. Same thing with all your one-pagers. So you go to different events or you're handing out one-pagers for your company. That should be very similar to all the messaging that you have on your emails and on your website. And then a lot of you probably have either user manuals or potentially a user interface for your product. That is vitally important. And I'm going to show an example of how it's done poorly, and you guys can see what it is. But if that consistency isn't there in sort of your UI or potentially in your user manuals or whatever it is, if it's not tying back to the brand, you're losing that momentum that you've created and spent all this time creating through your other vehicles. And then lastly, people. People need to be talking about your product the same way as they can read about it on the web or get an email or the user interface. Again, all of these need to be consistent. Just think about that Baby Shark. If all of these are saying the same thing over and over again, it's going to be hard for them to not understand the message and the position that you guys are trying to make with your product or service. So as I mentioned, there's a couple examples that I've pulled out here that I think highlight sort of a jarring effect as opposed to someone who maybe be doing it right. Again, this is just kind of tongue in cheek a little bit, but I think you guys will get the, no pun intended, the message about, how this works. So up here in the Northeast, I'm based in Boston. I'm not sure if you could tell by my accent at this point, but National Grid is one of our utility providers. So they spent a lot of money on this website. They spent a lot of money on their branding. It's nice. It's a nice landing page. The colors are nice. The pictures are good. So they did a lot in research and finding what they should have for their homepage. However, what the problem happens is when you go to log into your account, you're faced with this. So, you get there, it's nice, you got it, it's comforting, you feel a brand presence, and then you log in and you're faced with this completely disjointed user experience. You just lose everything that you've created with that first homepage, right? You've lost all your momentum, you've lost all your branding. Again, subliminally, they're like, wow, and it's a little bit jarring. And then once you log in, now you're into this user interface, which is, again, not very consistent with how you were presenting yourself online, in general. So again, this is just a super point that people get comfortable with brands and then they become comfortable with you. So if they're comfortable with, how you look and feel, and then get a jarring experience like this, then it really affects your brand and it affects your relationship between you and your customer. So on the flip side, Eversource, which is another one of the providers up here in the Northeast, has done it right. And so again, they spent a lot of money on their branding, spent a lot of money on their website, and they created this sort of landing page. This is their homepage if you go to eversource.com. When I log into my account, I'm now served with this. Again, very consistent. It's comfortable. It's clear. It's concise. It looks very similar to the homepage. The whole header in the website stays the same. So that jarring experience of the other one is not there. It's like, oh, it's comfortable. I feel like sometimes even if your experience is totally disjointed, you might feel it's not valid. Like you've gone to another website that might be, fraudulent. So again, it's very important to keep the consistency when it comes to all this stuff. And then that's just kind of two examples of it. I mean, I could come up with a lot of them, but again, you can see how, it's jarring from one experience to the other, as opposed to a nice unified experience as you log into the user interface there. So just to summarize it up, I like this quote here: be yourself, everyone else is already taken. But it's really important to do that legwork up front, really understand who your target audience is, and then how they understand language, so how to speak to them, and then your key points on those differentiators of what you're going to solve for that customer. So understand who you are and who you're servicing is vital, and then craft your messaging around that and make sure it's consistent. So again, just to summarize up, make sure you're speaking to the language of your buyer, make sure they're understanding and not using terms and acronyms. Just think about it. It's human nature. If someone uses an acronym and you don't know what that acronym is, you're never going to say, wait a minute, what's that acronym? Because you don't want to seem like you're not in the know, right? You don't want to seem like you don't know what that means. So 9 times out of 10, you're never going to know that the person you're speaking to has no idea what you're talking about, because they're not going to say anything. So just make sure you're speaking the language that they understand. Then simplify your messaging to highlight your products and services to make their life easier, right? It's really simple. Just boil it down. I know you guys are probably dealing with complex offerings and complex software or services, and there's probably a lot of things that they're solving for. But if you simplify it and bring out those key highlights, then you can actually get more headway with that person you're trying to sell to, and then you can expand with the other offerings that potentially your software product can handle. And then consistency, just the Baby Shark example there. Keep it consistent across everything, because if you don't, you end up losing the momentum that you've built with each one of your elements. So across all those touch points, whether it be your website, your marketing collateral, how you're selling your products, your sales reps, even to the point where your user interface, if you can keep everything consistent, it creates a nice branded experience. I mean, no one's better at it than Apple, right? And you look at every experience that Apple has, and it's just, it's just the same experience, and you're comfortable with it and you understand it and you create loyalty that way. So that's sort of my talk. I hopefully some of these points were valid for you guys, and hopefully I helped you understand a little bit how to put some messaging together for you.